so much for joining today. My name is Terri Wills. I'm the UK EMEA lead for social value as well as the leader for urban strategy at Arup, and we are here to talk about redefining social value. So the topic of today and really the focus is that we've been doing a lot of thinking about social value at Arup, and we really think that it should mean ultimately we're enhancing quality of life. But a key question, which we want to discuss a bit today, do we know really whether our interventions have truly made a difference in people's lives? And how do we make sure we're doing that? So really excited to have a very impressive panel with us today. Thanks so much for joining and agreeing to speak. So we have Louise Duggan, who's the interim head of regeneration at the GLA. Isabelle Benard, who is a senior program manager at Westminster City Council, John Alker, who's head of sustainability at Legal and General Capital, and Helen Goulden, who is the chief executive officer of the Young Foundation. So thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to start out with a bit of Arup's thinking around social value. We've been working in social value for decades actually. We probably just weren't calling it social value. We talked about social purpose, which is, part of the original vision of our founder, Sir Ove Arup. We've done a lot of work around social impact, but the term social value has really started gaining in prominence, I think, particularly since the Social Value Act in the UK, and it drove us to really step back and think, what does it really mean? We know it's in the legislation, we know what it means from a compliance perspective, but maybe what should it really mean? What are the origins of the term and the concept? So we did a bit of our own research and consultation and thinking, and we've developed a bit of an Arup social value approach. And that's what I'm just going to introduce today, which is maybe a bit of a challenge to the group that we have convened here today to discuss it, figure out how we can apply it in our work, and maybe unpick some of the opportunities, but also challenges. So really we're thinking about social value as a theory of change, which I can explain a little bit more. We're really thinking about it as the ultimate outcome of quality of life for people. So, and we believe that social value should be the enduring and systemic change. So I'm going to unpick those words a little bit. Enduring, what we mean long-term social value. What we want to avoid is social value being created during the construction phase of a built environment project, and then once it's built, we forget about it and we go away. We're trying to think about how do we almost create social value that stays with us for a long time. And part of achieving that is that it has to be a systemic change within a community. And we think that's really important. So that's why we believe that it has to be created within communities. Social value can't just be created by a contractor. It be created with a community whose lives what we're trying to affect. And it does need to lead to improved quality of life for individuals. We need to make sure we're not just focusing on what we term sometimes the outputs. Okay, we'll create another pocket park for this development, or we'll create a number of apprenticeships. We have to be really thinking about what does this mean for people and how is it going to change or enhance their lives. And ultimately, it has to result in a more inclusive, equitable, and just society, that we're not talking about quality of life just for a select few. We're talking about quality of life for everyone. So we've been really thinking about it in terms of a theory of change, which is maybe a bit nerdy, academic-y. We use it a lot we used to use it a lot in the not-for-profit sector around really how we're focusing on what we are doing and what that is resulting in. So it's a dynamic process, and it's going to be unique to every project, every place, and every community. We can't achieve the same outcomes in the same projects over and over. But we believe that when the right initiatives and levers are put in place, and then the physical and non-physical assets are created at a community level, that in turn, that will positively affect quality of life. And to put a bit more detail around this, we've framed it in terms of our inputs, the levers and initiatives, our outputs, which are the physical but also non-physical assets that we create for communities, so things like affordable housing, but also strong and proud communities. And then ultimately outcomes, and this is where we should be aiming for, but this is also where we should be trying, and I say the word try, to measure. So are we achieving outcomes that focus on quality of life? So with that, I'm going to pass over to our impressive panelists, and we'll hear a little bit from each of them around some of the work and the thinking that they've been doing in social value. And I'd love to start off with Louise. So Louise, the GLA has the Greater London Authority, for those that don't know the acronyms, has a really critical role to play in setting a vision innovation and strategic direction across London for regeneration. So at a practical level, we'd love to hear about how you build social value into capital projects. And yeah, pass it over to you.
So do we have the clicker?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And really lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's the second day in a row I'm presenting in front of slides rather than being able to see my slides. So I'm going to have a creak in my neck by the end of this week. But just to kind of start with it all, I mean, it's kind of always funny, isn't it, when we talk about our work, because the city is a thing, the city is physical, the city is the people and the physical kind of assets that we have. And this is a plan that we use. We've been using it for over 10 years now. It's adapted from the Abercrombie plan, but it's very much about the psychogeography and the localities. So it's not a bureaucratic assertion. It's what people actually think about and what they call home and the places that they actually relate to. So I'm using that to kind of ground us in the city. And then the minute you try to talk about your work, it gets very abstract and very kind of octopusy. And, you know, I've got about 17 versions of this slide. You know, we can slice it this way or that way or the other way. So what I'm presenting here is not definitive. It's a jumping off point. But I guess this just shows you the ways that our team, so working within the context of, you know, the Mayor's vision for London, this is what the Regen team does. We really focus on this idea of our role in convening, engaging with strategic partners all the way through. Well, I mean, it's listed there, so I'm not going to repeat it, but that's in order to be having these kind of conversations, to be finding out what people are thinking and to be feeding back into that thought process. The Innovation and Thought Leadership, this is a program that we have called the Good Growth by Design program. And it's generated a really impressive list of inquiries that we've developed with the Mayor's design advocates and with the broader sector in London communities, ranging from things like diversity in the built environment sector through to social infrastructure and connectivity, through to, you know, a child-friendly city, to, you know, safety for women and girls in the built environment, women, girls and gender diverse people. But we also do program management and the kind of little sketchy, there's a feedback loop here constantly. You know, our programs reflect what we're learning through that kind of thought leadership and through that engagement. So they are constantly kind of changing, innovating, evolving. And there's things like, for instance, the recent procurement of the A+U panel, which I know Arup are on and which some people in the room were at the launch of last night, which is absolutely central, a central kind of objective of that is to drive the inclusion and social impact of procurement. So that's the kind of systems level change. It's, you know, it's not on a project, it's on this panel of pre-procured people or companies that are delivering the change and remaking the city. And then it goes back to place-based partnerships. So that is working with colleagues on the ground, in communities, often with boroughs, often with a broader kind of civil society. But those are the people that we defer to. They know their places, they know their people. We defer to them. We can bring some kind of strategic stuff, but we're not pretending that we absolutely know everything. And then my last slide is just kind of, you know, this is representing that same stuff, but just focusing on how much of our work is place-based. So even when we're thinking, when we're talking, when we're developing strategic or place-based relationships, it always comes back to what's happening in your community, on your high street, in the industrial area around the corner from you. So I just kind of think that's, you know, a very notional graphic of how much of our work we consider to be place-based. I'm just setting that out as a framework so that when we have the conversation, we can jump into some of the more specifics.
No, it's great, really helpful. And I like how you brought up procurement. It's such a boring word sometimes, isn't it? But it's so important. Like, we've done a lot of thinking about how procurement is such an important lever for the local authorities and for the GLA to really push on social value, and how do we use that more. And, you know, that's something maybe we can unpick a bit later. But yeah, that's,
I mean, the Mayor
really
spends
helpful.
£17 billion every year. So if he spent that,
no small change.
that's a big hose, right?
How do we use that and direct it? Yeah.
So, you know, it's thinking at that systems level. But
yeah.
anyway.
No, fantastic. Thanks. And so that's the GLA perspective across the combined authority. But now, Izzy, from Westminster perspective, I mean, we're really interested in hearing about the work that you're doing directly with the residents in the council and some of the social issues that you're seeing. I know you're really feeling the cost of living crisis and, you know, some of the initiatives that you're taking to try and support residents in that.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you so much to all present for your time and kindly having me here today. So my name is Isabelle Benard. I'm the Senior Program Manager for Business Community Partnership, and I lead on the work that we do with our corporate social responsibility, our responsible business network, which I'm here to talk to you about today, and our community investment portfolio, which is a digital platform that the Council is developing to facilitate CSR community investment and social value investment for businesses and the charity sector. We are currently designing that, and subject to everything running on time and no issue with IT, we should be able to launch that in September or October this financial year. In terms of the Responsible Business Network, I'll just spend 30 seconds to provide a bit of context. I'm aware we have 5 minutes, so I'll try to condense everything, but if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me after this presentation. I'm very happy to circulate this. So we set up the Responsible Business Network almost 3 years ago as an emergency response from the Council during the first lockdown. Initially, we operated for 4 months, and we were able to provide service to the Ivory Estate area, which is part of our regeneration, where Arup is helping to work as well. And we provided service to 800 isolated senior residents who didn't have access to their carers. So based on the work that we did there, the business working group felt that this was a great initiative. So we set up the network, which is a platform to exchange best practices in terms of CSR and social value, and coming together and respond to any emergency campaigns that we have. In terms of our operational model, my role is that of a business connector. I work very closely with businesses to understand what their social value and CSR agenda is and what their priorities are for the financial year. And I simultaneously work with our community partners, like the community team, the intelligence forums, to understand where the needs are for the community. Some of the campaigns that we've done in the past, I'm not going to run through them, but there's been lots of work that we've done with the network, and this has all been through CSR and social value, and it's been very successful. This was our Digital Futures, Festive Cheer, Silver Sunday. All of this were delivered around the Ivory Estate and regeneration area. And this is some pictures and case studies from the work that was carried out. The reason why I'm sharing this is because this could not have happened without the support of businesses. And all the volunteering and the delivery happened by business staff being trained and onboarded and helping practically on the ground to deliver all of the initiatives. And Festive Cheers campaign, our Afghani refugees response, some of the donations that came through, and the work that we are currently doing, which is our latest emergency, is our cost of living. So in July, the Council launched our cost of living strategy, and in September we declared it an emergency for the Council, because we, through our strategy and intelligence team, we identified that there is 31,000 households that are at risk, and we've broken it down as such. But the idea is that in terms of vulnerable people that we have north and south of the borough, we have 6,791 low-income households that are currently at pension age. We have 36% of our low-income households that are single people occupants, and then 48% of our residents are have a disability or have stated a disability background, and currently we have 36% of our estates population that are in fuel poverty, and they are receiving some sort of benefit. And 39% of our families from low income, their children are receiving free school meals. So based on this data, we declared the emergency, and with our Responsible Business Network, and we've been working closely with our council suppliers, with our commercial landowners, with our developers, to put together a cost of living campaign, which we have split on 4 different pillars. So the first one being the cost of living fund, where businesses can contribute directly, and through our panel we decide where that money is going to go to support different themes that is aligning with their sort of CSR agendas. And then we have our fuel poverty pillar, where we're working closely with suppliers and developers, where they can donate vouchers that can go directly to the residents, and they can choose how to spend those, whether being food vouchers or fuel vouchers so that they have the dignity to choose. Because what was happening before, you would just have food donations and good donations, and people were receiving these boxes and literally was lots of unwanted stuff. So we wanted them to have the options and set up the partnerships with the charities and with the supermarkets where we could afford to purchase these vouchers. And the fourth pillar, we've been partnering with One Westminster, and we have 240 voluntary community organizations operating in the borough of Westminster from grassroots to established levels. And we are able, through our business partnerships, to put a volunteering support mechanism in place. And volunteering happens on two fronts. One, pro bono volunteering. So this is where our businesses provide their expertise, and they can go in and help businesses with project management, marketing, because our charities are reporting that they are extremely outsourced and stretched, and they're operating only on volunteering, so they need extra support. And the second type of volunteering is where staff can be onboarded, trained, and they can go out there and do the delivery of the different opportunities that we have. Hopefully that was within.
Yeah, no, it's really, really helpful. And yeah, it's also a challenge to us thinking about our role, as Arup, and for others in the room. There's, we've been involved in this network, and that's very much about the kind of volunteering, giving back, the programs. And then there are built environment projects that we do, and the Ebury Estate is one of those. And the slide that you showed with some of the social challenges that you're seeing in the council, it's a real challenge to us to think about how do we use our built environment projects as well as our volunteerism to try and have an impact and support residents. And I think that's a real challenge to all of us in the room about how we can support you in doing that through our projects as well as the volunteering.
So something I wanted to showcase, and why I had these pictures here, going back, this is Dryburgh Community Hall, just here in some of the pictures. And basically this is a community center within 5 minutes walking distance to the Ebury Estate area. And when we had to respond, part of when I was redeployed during the lockdown, I was appointed as the strategic operational lead. So I was working very closely with the community centers to see how we can respond to the need and how we can convert the community halls to operational hubs. So during that time, we were operating with 140 volunteers, which most of them came from actually Arup, Wilmot Dixon, Boyks, because they had their workforce. It was the lockdown. We couldn't get anybody to come in. So the help was on two fronts. One, reusing the working sites that you had, and using your staff to be trained so that they can go on the ground and deliver. So when we're building environments in the future, it's really important to focus around community centers and communal areas where residents can operate on daily basis, and they can sort of hang out and learn skills, but also for us to then come in and run operations of the skills.
Yeah,
so
it's a great example. It's the space, but also the program associated with it, and how do you bring the two? It's really, really helpful. John, as an investor, developer, asset manager, there's so much that L&G does. I mean, we're really interested in how you're thinking about social value. I know you're doing a bit of thinking. It's a bit in line with the, our attempt to focus on outcomes, and you're talking about impact, and really interested about also how you're thinking about measuring that from, also an investor perspective. So, yeah.
Thanks, Terry, and hi everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Yes, we've just finished a fairly intensive bit of work to try to, I suppose, put more consistency and kind of structure to what I think probably L&G's been doing for some time in terms of delivering and then evaluating social impact, which I'll come on to in a second. So 3 points. One, I'm going to talk about impact. 2, collaboration. And 3, I'll touch on sort of commercial considerations. In terms of impact, we've gone kind of intentionally from talking about social value to talking about social impact. And that's very deliberately to try to bring in the sort of impact investing mindset and the sort of impact management and measurement kind of discipline. So talking about place-based social impact and really emphasizing the point around it being intentional, additional, and really trying to focus on kind of, in your words, theory of change. Yeah, agree, very NGO and a little bit jargony, but I think coming into the mainstream and something we talk a lot about now. So that's kind of my first point. My second point was going to be around collaboration. Which, again, is a bit like procurement. It's one of those words that you hear a lot, and it sounds a little bit boring. What I'm talking about here, our kind of toolkit is and our kind of approach. It's not a top-down prescriptive one. Listen to Louise. I mean, it's absolutely about working kind of within a wider vision for places which, typically are driven by local authorities, combined authorities, etc., and being able to kind of plug into that. I think is kind of is really important. I think the local combined authority can kind of set that vision, and then can obviously kind of help facilitate with its partners the right partners to deliver on that. And of course, part of that from our perspective is bringing capital to the table. And something we talk a lot about is catalytic capital. So how can we really help unlock places? And it's not obviously just about the finance, it's also about other key institutions, actors, sectors, and we work a lot with universities, who I think are also quite key in many cases. Lots of great examples from our portfolio. Bristol is a good one, with a very innovative relationship with the City Council and unlocking land that's been vacant for 20 years. And then the third point I was going to make was around, again, sort of commercial considerations. I don't think anybody in this room probably needs convincing that there's a business case for this, right? That's probably kind of why we're here, and there's lots of reasons for that, not least our relationships with local authorities, but also actually third-party investors increasingly. But the point I more wanted to make was around, this is not just about affordable housing. Now, we do a lot of affordable housing, but it's not just about affordable housing. And in fact, I think a mistake a lot of investors make, affordable housing doesn't equal social impact. So the message I suppose I'm wanting to kind of touch on is almost kind of whatever the business model, there's opportunities to maximize social impact. Of course, it really helps and will really maximize social impact if you can reach kind of underserved groups, particularly those that are struggling, financially, as we've heard. But I think whatever the model, there's opportunities. And so if I think, from our kind of portfolio, we have a retirement village operator. Typically the residents of those villages are not terribly pressed financially, to be perfectly honest, but they do struggle with loneliness. Yeah. So in the operation, again, not just the sort of the construction, in the operation of those villages, there's some really great initiatives targeting loneliness, and crucially, not just involving the residents of those villages, but actually opening up those activities to people outside of those villages. So just a few thoughts to kind of kick us off.
No, it's really helpful. We've been doing a lot of thinking. I know we've had discussions before also about the commercial link and how much, maybe we can get onto this in the discussion, but how much do you need to quantify the commercial returns, right, associated with social value, or how much is it enough to be able to articulate the social impact, and that in and of itself is enough of a commercial motivator. So I think that's something we wrestle, sometimes clients will say, we want, those SORI kind of the big number around what this is valued, but then there's also the importance of the kind of more specific KPIs around, how this is actually changing people's lives and wrestling with the two.
Well, let me, make one more point, because
you've
drawn me on it, and you wanted me to make it. I mean, I'm on record banging on recently about, I think process is key, not monetization. And look, there's a lot of people providing those services, and I totally respect that. But for us, frankly, I think it's got to an unhelpful point when it's like my social value pounds figure is bigger than your social value pounds figure. Because what's to say one is better than the other, actually? It really is about understanding the need, being able to evidence that you're responding to that need, again, theory of change, and then really the measurement piece for me is, have you delivered what you were going to deliver?
Definitely.
And what is the lived experience of people, and what are those kind of real outcomes? So we would welcome probably more kind of interrogation and frankly comparison, if there's a way of doing that, of process. You know, what's the process that you've brought to this? I think that's key.
And that's actually a great segue to Helen. So Helen, the Young Foundation, our understanding, you've been leading in social innovation for decades now. I know that social value is an area you're working more in, and we'd love to hear more from you about how you use the process of community involvement to create social value, and how to ensure that we're really hearing the voices of communities by working with the communities directly. So keen to hear from you.
Yeah, and I will segue into that maybe by just sort of talking about the why you would do that a little bit first. And I'm just really struck by the sort of facts and figures that you presented, and also that that's what you see everywhere and worse, right? So, excuse me, the scale of the challenges that we face are enormous. I mean, we can talk about health inequalities and poverty, an 8,000% increase in use of food banks, 4 million children in poverty, and sort of that's layered on top of, you know, a disinvestment in our local government and public services over the last decade or so, a declining trust in our institutions, probably the investment that we need to come into this country being sort of heading towards the US or towards the Union, then presenting its own problems of what is the economy in this country, and then the societal things that flow from that. So everyone talks about perma-crisis and polycrisis. So I don't think we should be under any illusions that the scale of the challenges needs to be met by everybody working very, very differently about how you solve those things. And so the why of community involvement is that if you look at the sort of foundations of what a really thriving place or society is, you see that there is strong social capital, there's belonging and connectedness across those communities, and there is good social infrastructure, so people can live, work, play, create, do things, bump into people they don't know in a way that brings people together. And the evidence is really, really clear. There isn't no evidence, there's lots of evidence. If you have strong connected places, that foundational layer, then you have less crime, you have increased attainment, you have improved health and well-being, you have increased employment, and you have far more swifter recovery rates and even survival rates of people in times of crisis. So the business case for why you would invest in that foundational layer is absolutely there in terms of what sort of a socially responsible government and economy would do. But very little investment goes into that. And if those of you working in public services or in or around it, you'll know that that preventative argument of why you should invest upstream is so difficult to make for a whole host of good and bad reasons. So what the government ends up doing is we end up putting in levelling up funds or money into those places where the commercial opportunity doesn't stack up. I won't get too political, but you don't, not just, I mean, outside London, in places in different countries where we've spoken to some people in the regions this morning who were at this event, where the commercial opportunity to invest in those places is just not there and never will be there unless you've got some really creative thinking about constructing finance and aggregating investment deals that allow you to deploy capital in places where otherwise it's just not there. And so you've got this sort of money going in that doesn't do anything. Emily's here this morning, her research shows from the Institute for Community Studies that, you know, you have a 0% relative change in economic advantage after 15 years of investment into poor and left behind communities. It isn't about the money, it's about investing the money in the right place. Yeah. How do you invest it in the right place? You involve the people and understand what really matters to those people, and we need to be continually building the case for that. And the exciting time that we find ourselves in terms of business, in real business engagement in this, is that actually there is a redefining of the social contract. Business will have to do more. It wants to do more, but there's no getting away from the fact that there's an instrumental reason why it should as much as a moral reason nowadays. So if you want to understand how to make a place better, then work with the people in that place. So we've done a lot of work in the last few years in Barking Riverside. You will know that big property development down there, 10,000 homes and all the associated infrastructure. We acted as the sort of intermediary, if you like, to help the community co-create a social value framework. So what does it really mean? The lives and the physical environment for the people that already live in that place are changing quite dramatically over the years and will then change permanently. What does a great place look like to them? Now that has resulted in a really good equitable partnership between people and communities and the developer, where there is some accountability to the community about what great looks like. And so I think there are lots of different models. A lot of the social problems that we have are social in their ends as much as their means. So it's sort of, there is an incumbent to engage more with communities. If you've got serious knife crime or serious violence in your areas, it's not going to be solved by policy. It's just not. It's behavioural things are solved by behavioural social solutions. You can't do that unless you're deep in the weeds and understanding that community really well. My final point, if I may. So, in amongst all of that, obviously, there is great need in our communities, in terrible crisis, but there is a problem sometimes where, whether you're in business or whether you're in government, you think one of two things. You think that either communities are a problem to be solved. So, lo and behold, what happens when you migrate sort of 600 traumatised refugees into a poor left behind community? No, so then you've got a problem to solve that is absolutely of our own creating. So it's a problem to be solved, or they're sort of needy beneficiaries. And it's just not true. I mean, there is great need, but there's huge capability and capacity. And where there are incentives to engage with people, you will uncover lots of community-led solutions of people who are more than able to step up and do more in their communities and get involved. So a few years ago, actually a decade ago, I was involved in running the Big Green Challenge, which is a big £1 million, big, not for you guys, but tiny, in the Indian world, big £1 million competition to give to the community that could reduce their carbon emissions by 80% over 12 months. And it was hugely galvanising, and we had 355 communities competing against each other. We awarded lots more money in the end because there were lots of winners. But what that did was it built a real sort of sense of that actually there's collective impact that we can have here with businesses, with the local authority, with our communities. But it also revealed an entrepreneurship that we sometimes think doesn't exist, and it does. And so we had investable deals to put into micro-hydro as a result of community coming together to do that. You had collective commercial, kind of collective purchasing of solar panels in Oxford. There's loads of things that engaging with a community doesn't mean you giving it something. You're creating something together. Now that can sound quite sort of Pollyanna-ish and sort of maybe my cup's half full a lot of the time, but we know it's there.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, a lot also to challenge us as Arup, how do we go further working with the community? But I think really resonates what you're saying about the need to strengthen communities and understanding the impact that can have and the positive impacts and how do we focus there? Because I think at Arup we've done a lot of work over decades in sustainable development internationally and a lot of thinking about resilience and we've looked at kind of natural disasters and how the strength of the community features so high on the list of what enables those communities to withstand some of those shocks and stresses. And I think what we want to do more is understand that in the context of the UK, and we're exploring a collaboration together to how do we invest in more research into this space to kind of prove the point, but then also how do we operationalize it, I guess. And that's a key question about how do we get into communities, work with them, strengthen them in a way that works for them. And how do we do that at scale, but also at the local level? So and that's the need for organizations like yourselves. So the questions are pouring in from online, but I think we kind of wanted to have a few questions just to discuss amongst ourselves, and then we'll really open up. But I guess something that we're wrestling with is, I think, we've laid out a lot of also our ideal ways of working and how do we focus on that, in-depth community strength and the outcomes or impact as we're talking about, and focus on quality of life, address some of these social challenges that we're seeing and from residents. What are some of what gets in the way of us being able to do this? And I don't know, just like your thoughts on the top one or two challenges that you're seeing in getting to this kind of level of impact that you'd like to see. Maybe Izzy, I'll start with you.
From me, from an operational perspective, and somebody who is also Westminster staff and a local resident, so I guess I can speak on both grounds, I would say perception. So when we initially were setting up all of the operations, when we were talking to the community or the residents, they seem to have this understanding, or there is a mind gap, that businesses are just there to make profit and it's a gap between us and them. So why would they be involved? So just getting them to turn around and actually be part of it or buy into it, and to say actually businesses do care. They are willing to meet you halfway, and it's not just about profit. So it's just addressing that narrative and that perception so that community can engage. I really like what Arup did around the Ebury development, because you set up consultations and you were talking to the community groups on monthly basis, and also to the residents around the place making. So it wasn't just the council coming in and demolishing these estates, but it was about the council and Arup coming in, talking to them to say, what would you like this place to look like, because you're going to live here. And it was about, would you like to have a communal garden? Would you like to have a community center? How else can we help you? And they set up like a treasury chest where residents themselves could meet and utilize that money on how they saw fit around that area. So if we are able to address the perception and work closely, I think that would be great. On a sort of council level is also understanding the need. So at London level, Westminster is completely different and it has a different landscape. We have 55,000 businesses operating. Everybody assumes that Westminster is like one of the richest boroughs, yet we have 205,000 residents, and they are the poorest, one of the poorest in the country, and our regeneration areas are the poorest in the country as well. So it's just, how do you set up a bespoke approach to help those communities?
It's a really good challenge to us also to think about that perception and how do we break that down when we're going into community. So thanks. Yeah, John.
Yeah, gosh, good question. I think it's probably just where do people start? I think for many businesses, and I include some of our subsidiary businesses, it's just a kind of behaviour change piece. We've done things a certain way, and now we need to think about doing things a slightly different way. And in some cases, it's actually just putting a different wrapper or a different structure around some of those things that may already be taking place. But it's not easy. So I think there's a sense that social impact, social value sounds a bit fluffy. It's not hard like carbon or something like that. But actually, it's specialist. Doing kind of a high quality place-based needs analysis, really good community engagement. These are specialist skills. So I think it's just that process of integrating it within business as usual.
Yeah.
No, really.
So
Yeah,
I build
Helen,
on
pick
that.
on that.
It's
Yeah.
so true. The canvas is so broad, isn't it? There's no universally agreed end goal. There's no net zero equivalent to any of those.
Agree.
And it's so it can be subjective, and it's often very values driven. And the people have different values about what they think the levels of inequality should be, or poverty, and so on. So I think there's definitely, the canvas is so broad. I mean, I spent my summer brilliantly, sadly, analysing the FTSE 100's annual reports to try and look at where there was sort of where you saw really good practice, or what you tended to see and what they chose to put forward. And it's very inputs and outputs oriented. This many volunteering hours, this many ex-offenders, this many women in leadership positions. It's like, that's brilliant, that's great, but it's so unstrategic, it's very ad hoc. You can basically report what you want. You don't have, there isn't really an accountability framework there either. And so I think it requires you to sort of lean into the purpose of the business. So it has to become the purpose of business. There was a guy, was it Douglas Lamont yesterday, was talking about, who runs Tony's Chocolate. Tony is that fastest growing chocolate company in the world, which is delicious. He was saying, we're an impact company that makes chocolate. We're not a chocolate company that makes impact. And though it sounds a bit trite, there's a complete flipping of what they think they're in the world to do, which I think is quite tremendous. So what we did was basically say, look, you've got the scope 1 to 3 frameworks for
net zero.
So let's have an organising framework. So we've got scope 1, think about your workforce. Scope 2, think about your procurement and your supply chain, which is systemic and important. You've got billions to spend. Scope 3, bring your communities into that as who, working with your communities. 76% of FTSE 100 companies say that their communities are their core stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of, with love to them, in a way, bobbins. It's not real. And so how do you bring meaningful community involvement into that accountability framework? And then we sort of extended it out to scope 4, which is almost like demands a higher state of consciousness, which is that it's about collective impact, that you are a contributing factor to social value. You're not trying to attribute it. And that allows you to jump over the inputs and outputs, because you're not so obsessed with trying to say we did this.
Mine's bigger than
You're-
yours.
Like, yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's really great because it is something that we've been wrestling with. I have more of a climate background and agree that it's like net zero, we get it. We get greenhouse gas emissions. So that framework and being able to focus, because I think what we're seeing in social value is kind of similar to what we were seeing maybe 6 years ago in the space around climate, that the developers, there's a bit of competitiveness. Okay, how do we do more on social value? So having that framework and accountability, and I think that's really great. Louise, any thoughts?
I think this is brilliant. This is stimulating, despite a late night last night. So I think, right, I'm going to go into the kind of the meta, and it's reflecting and building on a lot of what others have said already. But it's like, I think it's institutional entropy. Okay, that's what it is. Across the piece, people want to change. They're not sure how to change. But I think the thing that's making change happen is that the context is changing. The perma-crisis, the kind of clock ticking on the climate, the shifting attitudes that communities have. Speaking from London's point of view, I mean, I said this yesterday, but it's like, it's no longer NIMBY. It's not on those terms, thank you. People are getting more sophisticated, communities are, and more power to them. They're advocating for themselves. And there's something about, we as let's say the built environment or the public sector we are in catch up. There's things like, the investors, the ESG agenda is going straight up there. The environment is kind of achievable. They're working on that. There's tactics. The governance is something that's within your gift as an organisation you can deal with. It's the S that hasn't been sorted out, and there isn't that kind of clarity of where we're aiming at. So we're aiming at the sky at the moment, and we're puncturing some clouds, but we're not actually, changing the weather or changing the climate on this issue. And I think that's where impact becomes really, really important, because when you define your terms and you're able to say, this is what we're trying to shift, this is our baseline, and here's our progress, that begins to kind of build that. And I think then I observe a lot of big organisations, it's like being a teenage disco. They're kind of standing around the edge of the dance floor wondering, God, I wonder if my friend could ask that person to maybe, and I think we're in that space, and like you said, Terri, it's about kind of 10, 15 years, I would say, behind the environment kind of agenda. And then speaking, that's looking at the issue and the context and looking into the organisations that can make change. But looking out of those organisations to the communities, I raised my eyes when we spoke about Levelling Up Fund, because what we got there was a splurge of cash, last minute, into communities and organisations that weren't prepared, had not had the kind of the decency of some notification to build the capability and analysis in order to be able to have a good plan and to spend that money well in a way that served their needs, So there's just these splurges that are just, everybody's got whiplash, and this kind of, Hunger Games attitude of every single borough in England and the UK, in fact, slugging it out for what is effectively, I'm apolitical because I'm a public servant, but what is effectively, we've starved the system of that long-term engagement that costs money, and that in order to be in those communities and be effective in those communities, it takes time and capability and capacity. Yep. And so these communities go from underserved and ignored to patronised. Here's the money, spend it tomorrow, this is the solution.
Only on capital projects.
Only on capital projects, and maybe you can spend revenue, you can capitalise the revenue it costs to pay for consultants, but we can't pay for your time, resident. So it's kind of like, that's my kind of mega from the, but it's that kind of context. It's the looking into our sector and industry and how we change through impact and measuring, but it's also having the humility and the patience and the good sense to invest in the capacity and capability of communities to make their own change happen.
Great provocations, and I think we're involved in the Towns Fund, and it really echoes, because what we saw is that the towns that had capacity benefited the most because they are able to leverage the programs that we supported. So how do we flip it and provide the capacity to be able to benefit? Yeah, so it's a complex one.
And if you don't mind, just looking across London, I know that like looking at Luff again, you know, boroughs spent between 20 grand and 140 grand on making those applications, okay, at breakneck speed.
Yeah.
And what we observed was it was the places that had, you know, the least capacity and capability in-house, who hadn't been given, you know, there are places like, for instance, Tottenham, there are places like Camden where there's been a long-term programme of change happening. They've got their analysis in place. They're able to pivot. There are other places where they haven't. The need is great, but the kind of investment over time, so they're going from 0 to 120, and they're expected to do that in 5 seconds with community
That's why
engagement.
when National Lottery set up Local Trust, which gives £1 million to, is it 10 million? I think it's 10 million. To 150 left behind are the most disinvested communities across the UK. It said you can spend that over 15 years.
Yeah.
You know, which was a huge deal, and that is the time.
Yeah.
And that's to exactly that point, that unless you've got the absorptive capacity and capabilities in that place, and they've been invested in, we won't see any impacts from the money. The money means nothing in some ways.
Completely agree. So yeah, I think this is something we all need to work on. I think we'll take some questions. There are a number from online, a couple of which I think we can address, and then we'll move to the floor here. Paul King asking about, you know, kind of echoing what we've all been saying about shifting from quantitative to qualitative. How do we do that, Paul? I think Helen Scopes laid out a good challenge, and you know, this theory of change. So you know, maybe that's you know, helps address some of that. Katrina from World GBC, social value is a UK term, finding globally that there's much more language about social equity. A few of us had an email exchange with colleagues globally around that exact topic today. Should we call it social value and equity? How does social impact feature? What are the kinds of words that we should use? So yeah, one to discuss further. A really good question around Section 106. So I might just take maybe one question from the floor combined with the Section 106 question. You know, in terms of Section 106 requirements, how do we think that these kind of targets within Section 106 enhance or possibly distract from achieving these kind of outcomes and impacts, and kind of any ideas about how to use Section 106 better, maybe. But I want to take maybe one or two questions from the floor. Any hands? Otherwise, we'll dig right into Section 106. Yeah.
I think a lot of what the panel has said around perception, barriers, and you know, the need for genuine impacts really rings true. I come from the development angle, and thinking about both at sort of master plan, urban regeneration level versus individual level. I think Alice, this next would agree that, you know, I've recently left Stanhope, but Alice is still there. But you know, we spend an awful lot of time thinking up a different solution for every project, which is probably correct because the context is different for each project. But we, you know, the Stanhopes and the British Lands and the Grosvenors have that luxury, if you like, of being able to work at scale and work strategically with, you know, partners. I'm interested to know what the panel think. You know, how are we going to solve the point about smaller buildings, individual buildings, smaller developers who've still got a lot of cash to spend, actually having a meaningful impact, because frankly they haven't got the time or inclination to do. They may at heart want to do a good job of it, but actually what is missing is this platform where we don't reinvent the wheel every time, and that all that, you know, intelligence and knowledge within the local authorities and not-for-profits can be used effectively and efficiently without a lot of, you know, going around in circles.
Yeah, it's a great question. Maybe we'll take the Section 106 in combination.
Yeah, I think the Section 106 definitely plays in, because in some ways I think by the time you actually go to implement an outline master plan, what all the good thinking in the Section 106 is 4 years out of date. Yeah. And what you'd be better off doing is saying we're just going to ring fence this amount of money or resource, and we're going to deploy it in the right way at the right time. Yeah.
No, really good challenge. Sorry. Questions? Yeah, John.
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm directly answering either of those, but it's in that wheelhouse. Maybe this exists already, and I'm just not aware of it. But I feel like in a world of AI and very smart data platforms, etc., there has to be some clever people, Arup, young fellow.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. So yeah, give us a challenge here.
At a kind of whatever the scale is, you know, neighborhood, city, region, we can almost have a kind of needs analysis amnesty, right? You know,
Yeah.
we can pool our collective knowledge, and small developers, large developers, other institutions can plug into that rather than reinvent the wheel or do things on a really kind of, you know, micro scale. And it does feel like everyone's running around a little bit trying to do their own thing.
Yeah.
So there's got to be something in that.
Good challenge to us in the room. Yeah, online.
I just build very
Helen,
briefly
yeah.
on that, but I think that's really true, and it takes you to collective impact. So if you start thinking about pooling your collective intelligence, then start thinking about how you make sense of that together in terms of the different partners and stakeholders in the place and what the community's role is in that. And then you start to think about, okay, we've got different levers, different resources, we can have collective impact on this specific thing together. That there is a journey to go on there that takes you to a much more sensible place, which again is about process, not monetization.
Yeah. Louise.
It's funny how
possible.
precious people are about definitions, though. That's the thing that gets in the way. Everyone thinks, no, my definition is right. You haven't quite gotten it. No, that doesn't quite work for me. The thing I see is, you know, places in London that have chronic disadvantage have been the same for over a generation, have been the same for 50 years, you know. It's like, what we're doing at the moment isn't working, you know, so how do we kind of shift that mode? I've got a really sinking feeling that you want me to talk about Section 106,
Yes.
Terry.
No,
I guess what I would say, I'm not a kind of an expert in this. You know, that's like pretty much what everyone says when they talk about Section 106. But essentially, Section 106 is designed to mitigate the impact of development, and it's there. It can be spent on capital interventions. Again, not on the kind of the service delivery that's required to actually build that capability. So I would just kind of redirect your attention to the community infrastructure levy, because that's actually where you're able to plan over the longer term and you're able to do things that are more reflective of, responsive to what communities are saying they need, rather than, you know, there's a two-way conversation, but it's not always that we know best. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's just, you know, maybe I've dodged being technically competent on that front.
No, I mean, it's a good response. I mean, we have been doing a lot of thinking also with a few clients around the use of the GLA's kind of offset funds, and I use offset like this because it's not like a certified offset, but how do we use those to also create social value? Because right now they're really directed at sort of offsetting the operational emissions from a particular development, and can that be leveraged to, you know, combine sort of climate impacts as well as social? So I think, and that's, you know, the community, the infrastructure levy, but I think there's also, maybe this is one for you, Isabelle, that in those kind of negotiations between a developer and a local authority, you know, we get involved in a lot of those where, you know, really what we're trying to articulate is like our long-term outcomes for a development, but please only tie us to the outputs, you know, because of the complexity of those negotiations and agreements. So yeah, just love your perspective
Section
on.
106, from personal experience and having delivered employment and training before for 10 years, and having worked in Westminster with unemployed people, Section 106 tends to be a generic process, and it tends to be a ticking box exercise, and both the local authority needs to step up to understand and represent the need that the community has in a better way, but also I think negotiations with businesses. So as opposed to you just ticking the form and saying, I have this 20 million or 25 million development and I'm just going to get 20 placements out of it, from a perspective and community perspective, you hear the figure 25 million and only 20 job placements, it just doesn't make sense, or it doesn't convert right. So there's always a question of like, not sure I'm really seeing the difference. So if we're able to negotiate better, understand the need, and possibly just focus outside employment and training and encapsulate more things, that would be really great. But also is understanding the landscape, which I think is really important, because for the development sector and construction, even to fill those 20 placements, we're struggling because local residents are not interested. So we got a fatigue between suppliers, among suppliers and developers, because they're saying, oh, I have this ESP plan that I have to deliver, or social value plan that I have to deliver. I have to deliver the apprenticeships, but I have no residents to fill the posts. So I don't know what to do. So I think we need to step up look at the process, negotiate better, and possibly, expand like the theme or the narrative of what we need to deliver.
Yeah, no, that's great. We just have a couple minutes. So I want to just finish it with, this is thinking about Arup's role. We have a role in the community. We have a role as, support on our projects with our clients. We also invest in a lot of our own research and innovation and global partnerships and local partnerships. What is the one thing that you think Arup should be doing going forward from this conversation to really make a difference in the space that we're talking about in terms of leading to those outcomes? Maybe John, you've already picked up on it with your, maybe there's some kind of AI solution. Maybe I'll start with you if there's anything you kind of want to build on that, and then
no,
I'm
go
at
around.
The
end of my AI
yeah, okay.
knowledge. No, I'm not sure whether it's an Arup role, to be honest.
Or a bigger industry
but
role.
certainly you can act as an advocate
Yeah.
and
That's
a
a great role.
It's kind of our previous space, right? It's more where my mind turns to. I think we are in kind of desperate need again in this space of sorry, it's a boring word again, but collaboration between non-profits, business, industry groups, trade
Agreed.
bodies, etc. I feel like there's a leadership space there that can be taken, that can shine a spotlight on that process piece, so that encouraging all of us, driving all of us to be more transparent about what our approach is. And it touches a bit actually on Paul's question, I think, about qualitative, because we haven't spoken a huge amount about it, but absolutely key is retrospective, I guess, POE in the jargon, effectively. Post-occupancy evaluation. So it's actually what is the lived experience of people in places, and they're not going to give you a quantitative response. It's going to be highly qualitative, and in some cases, quite varied and all over the place. But we need to find a way of going back to the places where we have invested in, where we may no longer hold an asset, and actually understanding what the impact has been. So that's a long-winded way of saying I think we need to find a way of kind of coming together again to try to put some coherence around what we know is the right approach.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Yeah, great challenge to us as well as others in the room. Helen.
Well, you're one of the good guys, aren't you? I think so. It's sort of
We try, but
my analogy,
always
I
more
think,
we can do.
There is, of course. But to your point of sort of competitive advantage and thinking about actually when numbers and measures do come up, people do start looking to one side and going, my impact's bigger than yours and all that sort of. That's not bad, that competitive spirit. And I think the opportunity to take some risks with an organisation as big and as resourced as Arup is huge. And some of that might be really innovative and slightly on the edge, and it might challenge some of the ways in which we're doing things already, and it might make some people and some organisations feel deeply uncomfortable, and you might get lots of pushback. But to sort of move into the sort of how do we differently organise, differently finance, differently construct models for change in places, and how do you think very, very big in terms of these are the big problems we've had, and connecting that to the local. And there's a sort of an intellectual gap as well as everything else about how you make that really work. So be bold, be ambitious, and take some risks, because little organisations like ours, we can't do what you can do, right? Yeah. And it's actually deeply troubling being in the not-for-profit sector, seeing all of these problems and knowing that you've got none of it's the markets and businesses that have levers. It's,
Great challenge to us. Thanks, Helen. Louise.
Well, I guess I would speak to diversity and inclusion, and the diversity of the built environment sector and the diversity of the people that are actually authoring and reauthoring the city. And I think that Arup, invests a lot in its workforce, is a good guy, is seen as a good place to work. What can Arup do in terms of partnering and bringing on diverse talent or diverse organisations without them being direct employees? How do you partner? How do you partner with emerging talent to enable that to also grow, to seed the next generation? So I think there's something there, and that goes back to the kind of procurement piece. And I think the risk taking is really important. It's a luxury working, we're underfunded and defunded over the last kind of 10 or 12 years, but there are risks that we have taken, there are experiments that we have done, like I would just draw people's attention to small sites, small builders, because what that is doing, this speaks to a question earlier, is looking at smaller developers within London and how they can fix a big problem that we've got, which is the small fiddly sites that don't register on the attention of, you know, different big kind of house builders, and are really expensive and tricky for local authorities to actually dispose of in a way that drives social impact. So there's stuff there where small and medium scale, like the Peter Barber project out in Beechwood Avenue is an example. Double the number of houses that we thought could be on there when there was an original capacity kind of that. Really good design, a great solution for everybody. So I think that those kinds of small sites, small builders program, check it out. It's a kind of a
Great.
facilitating that risk taking.
Good for us to think about. And Izzy, finally, yeah.
Pretty much all of the
Okay.
okay. But I'll
covered.
just say, I think more what we can do is, instead of focus on outputs, think of like outcomes.
Yeah.
And obviously when we set up like the placemaking in the community, and just have long-term solutions to how we work with local authorities and the change we can bring about,
Yeah.
and really focusing on meaningful impact.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, you've all thrown down the gauntlet, so we have next steps cut out for us. So thank you so much for coming in, and I think there'll be coffee still if you want to have a chat and pick up some of these questions, but thanks to the audience as well. Thanks, everyone.